In today's video I will fulfill a promise that I made a year ago, and I will speed paint the Aleph side of Operation Blackwind, the current starter set of Infinity the Skirmish Wargame from Corvus Belli.
Hey guys, I'm Zoltan and you're watching PHLANSMINIATURE. 12 months ago I painted the Haqqislam side of the box, which took me a little more than 7 hours for the 7 models, and I promised that I would paint the other half if people wanted me to. I'll link that video in the corner if you want to check it out.
Since then I have received a lot of messages reminding me that I should paint the Aleph side at least before the new starter drops, so today we will do just that.
I will paint the 7 Aleph models in the box in roughly 8 hours this time, using my usual speed painting method but with a little twist. Since these guys have a lot of white armor panels and I really don't want to paint the white during a speed painting session, I will use a simple little trick to save us the pain of painting the white. By the way, there is a written version of this guide on my Patreon with 38 pages of step-by-step instructions, a ton of pictures and all the paints listed as well. Alright, let's get some paint on these guys. I primed all the models black and then used grey sear to apply a Zenithal highlight. I used this specific paint because you can easily get the same color as a spray primer, and if you don't have an airbrush you can simply spray them with the can from above. It is important to get full coverage on anything facing up, because we will be using this not only as a Zenithal for the contrast paints to go over, but also as a base coat for the white armor panels, so we don't have to actually paint them white, saving a lot of time and effort. So don't hold back and do a much more heavy Zenithal than usual.
Alright, now that all the models are properly white, let's put all the base coats in place, and the fastest way to do that is with contrast paints.
The white is already done, so let's go to the second most prominent color on the models, the purples. There are 2 types of purple on these guys in the official scheme, and the darker one covers way more surface. I'm using Leviathan purple contrast to cover these, using the art on the box to guide which panels should be this color. They are usually some decorative armor panels, and then the suit of the lady in the jumpsuit, the pants of everyone else who wears one, and so forth. But you don't have to follow the exact same layout as the box art. As long as you make sure that there will be still more white panels than purple ones, the overall color scheme should remain intact. After all, we are going for white armor with purple accents and not the other way around. The light purple elements are next, and there is much less of these on most of the models, so if you wanted to save time you could technically just paint these in the dark purple as well without hurting the overall look too much. But I decided to paint them and use Sigval Burgundy contrast to do so. If you ask me to describe these models without having them in front of me, browns and leather colors in general wouldn't come to mind, but actually there are a ton of straps and belts on some of these guys, which makes it an important color for us. I used snakebite leather contrast here, and to save some time I also painted the backpacks, the pistol holsters and sword sheaths in this color as well. At this point I was mostly done with applying the contrast paint, so I wanted to let the models sit for a night and let everything dry. Which means that this was a good time to add some texture paste on the base as well, which I had neglected until this point. I used some asphalt diorama paste from AK Interactive, mostly because it's completely black and I don't need to prime it, plus it has a nice subtle texture which suits what I plan to do with the bases. Once everything dried, I came in with some black and blocked in all the elements that I wanted to be either black or metal later on. These included all the weapons, the rim of the shields, the inside of the legs with this hexagonal pattern, and some decorative elements. I also took a little time to paint some of the buckles on the straps and the backpacks, but I didn't stress about finding all of them. A couple here and there will be enough for a high impact, low effort paint job like this. A couple of small things still needed base coats. I used Bugman's Glow to paint the little exposed skin these guys have, which is mostly their faces. For the face and left arm of the lady with the darker skin tone, I used whole red instead. And then everyone's hair got a coat of wildwood contrast paint. And finally the power sword of the lady in the jumpsuit got a coat of Yandan yellow contrast.
With that, all the base coats are finished, and I guess some people will be fine with the models at this stage if they want to get them on the table as fast as possible. But we are going to go further and highlight them a little bit.
First of all, let's take care of that white armor. One of the reasons for choosing grey sear as the base color is because we can now use off-white to highlight it up. If I used an actual white, it would have been difficult to apply the highlight since there is nothing brighter than white. The overall approach I will be using here is to forget about smoothness and go for high impact and high contrast. When you have these on the table, the most important thing is not to have creamy blends, but to be able to distinguish the various parts of the model and see as many details as possible. So to achieve that, the most important thing is to paint all the edges to add definition, and if you are struggling to do that, I have an edge highlighting guide on the channel which should help you out. I will put it into the video description. But on top of the edge highlights, I also added little scratches on the armor panels wherever I had space for them. If you want to go go fast, you can skip these, but they add a lot of detail and visual interest to the models, and in some places they can help define the volumes as well. And with a little practice, they are faster to apply than you would think. When I was happy with the white panels, I moved on to the next biggest color and started highlighting the dark purple. I used blue-violet as my first highlight color and did the same thing as on the whites, edge highlighting everything and adding some scratches wherever I could. And of course, just like before, you could leave the scratches out and just go with the edge highlights if you wanted to speed things up. But the purple is such a defining element of these models that I decided to put a little more time and effort into it, and I added an even brighter highlight with pastel violet on top of the other one. With this, I only painted some select edges, concentrating on the ones that were most exposed to the light coming from above. For now, this might look a little bit jarring, but later I planned to tone it down and smooth it out with a simple trick. Following the same order as with the contrast paints, the light purple things came next. Here I used intense pink to do the usual edge highlights and little scratches. Some of the pants and armor pieces also have a raised trim that in the box art is painted in this lighter color. It frames the darker pieces nicely, so I did that as well. And since we are already doing pink colors, we might as well do some glow effects. These barely take any time, but they are very high visual impact, so they are worth spending time on. Fortunately for us, most of these elements are already white due to the Zenithal highlights, so I can just paint them straight with a fluorescent pink. I also painted a little around them for a very basic OSL effect. And if they were not white, I simply covered them with off-white and then painted them with the pink fluo once it dried. All the leather bits got a single highlight with light brown. I did the usual scratches and edge highlights, but on the straps and the sword sheets I went for a lot of scratches coming in from the edges at different, sometimes intersecting angles. For the metal bits I used my trusty anthracite grey to do the heavy lifting for the first highlight. Some surfaces facing the light I covered almost fully this time, and I painted the highlights a little thicker because I planned to add some brighter highlights on top of this. These dudes have a surprising amount of weapons on them which I haven't even noticed until this point. Some of them are holding a machine gun, they have a bigger weapon on their backs, a pistol in the holster, a sword on their backs, and maybe even a knife strapped to their leg. I'm sure it comes in handy when they get into a scrap, but now we have a lot of details to paint and not a lot of time to do it. When I was done, I used pale blue to go further with the highlights. I painted only the upward facing edges with this and added smaller and thinner scratches and marks wherever I had space. I tried to keep this neater and thinner than the anthracite grey, so that one could still be seen under this brighter highlight.
Before I went on to paint the smaller elements, I wanted to smooth out the biggest ones first.
I thinned down the violet and purple contrast, the same one I used for the base coating, to something like 50% paint and 50% water, and painted this all over the dark purple panels. This darkened everything down a notch and smoothed out the highlights, integrating them into the original dark purple better. It's of course up to you if you want to do this step or you prefer the original harsher highlights and save some time in the process. I did the same thing for the metals as well, using watered down Black Lotus Express color. This adds a nice bluish greenish tint to the surface and integrates everything. And if you don't have this color, some watered down Black Templar will do as well. If I had more time to spend on this project, I would have brought back some of the highest highlights after this step with some off-white, but I felt that I will already go above the 7 hours or so I wanted to spend on these guys, so I left them as is.
Now I only needed to highlight some of the smaller elements like the faces and the power sword.
To be honest, I didn't spend much time on the faces since they are not very visible on most of these models, which is definitely not my excuse to not fiddle with the tiny faces. I simply highlighted the nose, the cheeks, the chin and the lips with sunny skin tone and then added a little magenta glaze in the shadows. I ended up painting the eyes of only 2 of these models since most of them are not visible, and on these tiny models this can take up half the time of painting the entire model in my experience, so I focused on the ones that had the most impact. For the lady with the power sword I used a mix of whole red and light brown for the first highlight, then finished the skin with pure light brown. And for the glow effect on her power sword I used a super simple trick. I edge highlighted the whole sword with off-white and then took some yellow fluorescent paint and painted it over the white lines. Now I only had the bases to finish and I was already above the 7 hours I planned for this project, so I went with something easy and effective. I didn't want to do the same red rust base I did for the Haqqislam side of the box, but something that still looks good when both forces are on the same table. I overbrushed the base with some whole red first. This just means that I was doing what is essentially dry brushing but without removing the paint from the brush on the paper towel, allowing me to cover way more surface. I followed that up with British Khaki using the same method, but this time mostly concentrating into the middle of the base under the feet of the models. The idea is to make it look like they are standing in the spotlight or something like that. Finally I did the same thing with Sahara Yellow, but concentrating into the middle of the previous highlight, essentially the very middle of the base. Now I just had to paint the base rims black as they always should be, and after 8.5 hours the models were finished. And the end result looks like this. They might not win any painting competitions, but I think they will look pretty damn good on the table.
I hope you guys found this video useful, and if you did, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe. And if you want to replicate this process, there is a written version of this guide on my Patreon, so check that out. Thanks a lot for watching and for your support. See you in the next one.